The plot takes place in Barcelona in the year 2013, when a strange illness spreads throughout the world, making people feel terrible terror about leaving their homes. Anyone who tries to go outside dies within seconds. Because of this, all city avenues become completely empty, with no one outside. Marcos has been living at his workplace for 3 months, eating company food and helping colleagues dig a hole in the parking garage that could connect them to the subway. One afternoon, he notices that someone broke a car window to steal a GPS, which makes him furious and causes him to dig with more force. This ends up being good, because thanks to him, they finally manage to break through the wall and find a safe exit from the building. Hey, what would you do if you could no longer step on the street? Because if you did, you would die instantly. The film I'm going to summarize is called Los Últimos Días. In English, The Last Days. It's a Spanish film that combines suspense with science fiction. It's one of the most distressing stories I've ever watched about trying to survive. That's why I invite you to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave a like to receive the best recaps. Now everyone is getting ready to leave, and while waiting in line to gather some things, Marcos can't help but notice that one of his supervisors, Enrique, has the GPS in his bag. Marcos decides to go talk to him and question him about it, and Enrique agrees to chat privately, as long as Marcos doesn't tell anyone else. Marcos begins to remember how he met Enrique. Several months ago, the man was hired to solve the company's manufacturing problems and was known for being very strict when dealing with employees, firing people without thinking twice when necessary. When he called Marcos into his office, he complained about him taking so long with the project, didn't want to hear about how difficult programming work is, and gave him a definitive deadline. He needed to finish by the end of the month or he would be fired. Marcos stayed late at the office, working on his program and getting more nervous every second when it didn't work. His partner Julia called to let him know that she and her friend Andrea were closing the store, and Marcos promised he would get there for dinner. But his computer crashed with a blue screen, and he ended up staying longer than he had planned. When he finally arrived at his apartment, he noticed that his neighbor opened the door just to see him arrive, and his partner had already eaten dinner without him. He found her making toys for her store, and while looking at a doll she was thinking of keeping for the future, she brought up the subject of having a child, and Marcos replied that he didn't think it was the right time. Later that night, he couldn't sleep, so he watched some television. The news was talking about a young Canadian who filmed his death after staying 6 months inside his house, never going out because of fear. The next morning at work, everyone was watching the same video, making Marcos's colleague, Rovira, leave the area nervously. Another colleague commented that he hadn't changed clothes or bathed in days. Back to the present, Marcos tells Enrique that he wants to find his partner, and the only way to navigate properly through the subway tunnels is with the GPS, since cell phones no longer have signal. He offers Enrique a deal. If he takes Marcos to his partner, he'll give him all the supplies he took from Rovira's locker. Enrique first refuses, but quickly changes his mind when Marcos threatens to tell everyone about the stolen GPS. After saying goodbye to their work colleagues, the two men enter the subway tunnels. The GPS is working well, but they keep it turned off to save battery, and for now, they manage with a subway map. There are already many people down there, and they even hear gunshots, so they hurry until they reach the station, which is full of survivors. Suddenly, a boy steals Enrique's bag with the GPS. He and Marcos start chasing him through the station, going upstairs and even dodging a fire until they reach an area behind the turnstile. The boy joins 3 men, including his brother, who is a former police officer and carries a gun. When the city outside finally begins to lose power, the policeman makes them kneel while his brother finds the GPS in the backpack. Then he approaches to take Marcos's bag as well. When the lights go out inside the station too, Enrique jumps on the policeman and fights with him for the gun, while Marcos knocks down the boy and gets the GPS back after it falls to the ground and the screen cracks. With the bag secure in his arms, Marcos hides behind a column, while Enrique manages to take the gun from the policeman and kills him before wounding his partner with a shot as well. Then he joins Marcos, and together they flee, easily blending into the crowd thanks to the darkness that has now taken over the place. They stop on the stairs to bandage the cut Enrique has on his hand and to see if the GPS is still working after falling. Fortunately, it still works. When Marcos sees that Enrique is keeping the gun, he thinks he's going to be abandoned, but Enrique says he'll keep his part of the deal. Marcos begins to think about the days before isolation again. One morning, when he was leaving his apartment to go to work, he heard a lot of flies inside his neighbor's house and noticed that the door was open. So he went in to see what was happening. He found the entire apartment full of garbage bags and a horrible smell that made him cough. His neighbor found him and attacked him with a knife, asking why he entered when he had never been interested in him before and didn't even know his name. Marcos asked how long he had been inside, and the man said he hadn't left the apartment for months. He tried, but was too scared and couldn't do it. Later, Marcos went to work, where he saw Rovira being dragged by security guards after being fired for sleeping in the office and never going home. Marcos followed them while Rovira tried to resist unsuccessfully. The guards dragged him outside and he immediately began to convulse. Having an idea of what was happening, Marcos told the guards to help him bring him back inside, but it was too late. Rovira was already dead. Later, Marcos decided to take a look in Rovira's locker and found several useful things for survival, like a flashlight, a gas canister, and some cans of food. When night came, he talked to Yulia about everything that had happened and how he thought the situation was getting quite serious. Julia tried to calm him down, and the two ended up being intimate. Back to the present time, Marcos wakes up from a nap and realizes that Enrique has disappeared. So he thinks the guy had left and abandoned him alone. But soon after Enrique returns carrying a plastic bag, he got to protect the GPS device from water. The two guys go back into the subway tunnels, and Marcos keeps trying to figure out what or who was waiting for Enrique at the place he wanted to go, but the man didn't want to tell anything. Marcos also notices how Enrique always saves the seeds from everything he eats, especially from apples. After a while, using the GPS, they found an entrance to the sewers and threw themselves inside, without getting hurt because the water helped cushion when they fell. They used the device again to find the right path and finally managed to get under the building where Marcos's apartment was. To get in, they came up with a very simple plan. They were going to hang the gas canister from the pipes on the ceiling and make it explode by shooting at it with the pistol. Enrique tried first, but missed the shot since his hand was injured. Then, Marcos decided to try but also missed the first time, and the noise made his ear bleed. On his second attempt, he managed to hit the target, and the explosion was so strong that it threw him to the ground. Enrique helped him get up, and the two climbed through the broken pieces and went through the hole to enter the building, which, like the station, was also full of people who had lost their homes. His old neighbors still lived in the same place, but the door to Marcos's apartment had its lock completely broken. They could see an eye looking at them through the peephole, and this made Marcos very angry, who started yelling and pushing the door that was being held by a man speaking in a different language. When he saw the man's hand appearing, Marcos scratched his face, making the guy retreat and finally managing to enter his own house. The man made threats with a knife, and Enrique pulled his gun in response, the two staring at each other until the man's wife and daughter appeared. The girl could understand the language and explained that they had nowhere to go, so they occupied the apartment because it was empty. After the two men lowered their weapons, Marcos told them that place was his and took a photo of Julia from the wall to ask if they had seen her, but they swore there was no one when they arrived there. Then they looked through the entire house. Enrique found no food in the refrigerator, but there were some dead pigeons being prepared to eat, and an old bag of popcorn in the trash from which he took the seeds. He also took a knife from the kitchen. Marcos, meanwhile, went to Julia's work table, and after finding her little doll, he took a drawing that the girl had made and turned the paper over when he saw a doctor's name in the corner. It was an ultrasound image, because Julia had been expecting a baby since the last time he had seen her, and he had no idea about it. Marcos began to remember the last time they were together. They were watching the news about the disease they were calling the panic, which was killing more and more people around the world. The government asked citizens to stay calm and continue with their normal lives as they always had, which made Marcos very nervous. He became even more irritated when the news showed pregnant women having their babies in horrible situations and began complaining about how all of that was irresponsible of the women, which made Julia finally realize that he had never really wanted to have children and all the excuses he gave over the years were just lies. Very sad and crying, she ran and locked herself in the bathroom, not paying attention when Marcos tried to talk to her through the door. He left for work then, already noticing how there were few people on the streets and garbage was piling up in the trash cans. Even a man on the subway was wearing a mask. When he arrived at the office, he called Julia, but it was Andrea who answered her phone, saying that Julia didn't want to talk to him at that moment. Getting desperate, Marcos decided to go back, especially after both the phone and nearby televisions lost signal. But as soon as he went out to the street, he started feeling sick, so he had to run back inside and stay there for good. Back to the present time, the clouds open and rain begins to fall. Marcos and Enrique run to help the family collect water using an old stretcher. In a short time, residents from all over the city are putting up poles to hold buckets and containers under the rain to fill their water reservoirs. When night comes, Enrique prepares 2 spears using broom handles, while Marcos fills several bottles with the water they managed to collect. He also stores Julia's toy inside his backpack. The next morning, the two return to the sewer tunnels, and when they reach a division, they start arguing about which direction to take. Marcos wants to go to the shopping center where Julia worked to check if she's there, but Enrique doesn't agree. He says the deal was only to take him to his building, and that it's not his fault if she wasn't there when they arrived. Enrique even pulls his knife to protect himself and questions out loud if Julia is still alive, making Marcos very angry and causing him to throw himself on top of him to fight. During the confusion, Enrique drops the knife and Marcos drops the flashlight, which breaks when it hits the ground. The two stop fighting, and Marcos demands to know what Enrique has that's so important that it's worth more than his wife and child. Then Enrique finally reveals that he wants to reach Hospital Del Mar, where his father is hospitalized after being unable to move due to a stroke. He also tells Marcos that he could go along, because as soon as he reached the hospital, the GPS device would be his. After thinking a bit, Marcos agrees. The two find some stairs that lead inside a church. While exploring the place, they find a lighter and a glass with alcohol still inside. They use these things along with some pieces of wood to make a fire. The light seems to have attracted someone's attention, as they hear some noises nearby. They grab their spears and go see what it is. What they discover in the back of the church is a big surprise. A bear that escaped from the Barcelona zoo, which soon starts chasing the two. Marcos is almost reaching the tunnel stairs when he sees that Enrique has fallen and the bear is on top of him. He decides to stay and help. He stabs the animal with his spear to get it off Enrique, who runs back to the fire and lights a torch to keep the bear at a distance. But this doesn't solve it. The bear continues advancing and pushing the two toward the doors that would lead outside. Then Marcos has an idea. He asks Enrique to drop the torch, and when this happens, the bear takes advantage to jump on him. Marcos then receives it with his spear pointed, making the bear impale itself on it. The two can't stop laughing, as they haven't eaten meat in a long time. Soon after, they're savoring the bear meat they cooked on the fire. Enrique thanks Marcos for staying instead of running away with the GPS, and confesses that before all this happened, he would have fired him even if he had finished the work on time. This revelation only makes the two laugh even more. Enrique also says he's afraid that without his father, no one would notice if he died, and that there are some important things he still needs to tell him. In response, Marcos tells him he told Julia he didn't want to have children. But it wasn't completely true. He was just afraid of not being able to take care of and protect the child, a fear that only got worse in the situation they're living in. A few hours later, they return to the tunnels and encounter a family coming from the opposite direction. One person is injured, so they tell them to go with them to the hospital, but they receive bad news. Rumors said that Hospital Del Mar, where Enrique's father was, had caught fire. Desperate, Enrique runs to the nearest door and enters a building, climbing the stairs until reaching a floor high enough to see the city and confirm the rumors. The hospital was indeed on fire. Feeling he has no more reason to live, Enrique breaks the window with a chair and prepares to jump, but Marcos pulls him back inside and says he needs him. Enrique doesn't agree, so he gives Marcos the seeds for his future baby and tells him to go away. After going through the tunnels again, Marcos finally arrives at the mall, entering through a parking garage full of bodies. Ignoring the feeling of being watched, he runs to Julia's store, but only finds Andrea's mother's body. Getting very desperate, he searches through all the papers and notebooks, but doesn't find any clues. He throws everything on the floor angrily and cries until he notices something in the mirror. After cleaning the dirt, he finds a message from Andrea to her mother, saying they're trapped in the supermarket part of the mall. Marcos hurries to that area, which was closed so that the people upstairs can't come down to take their food. The men who provide protection threaten Marcos with a bow and arrow, so he shows a photo he brought from his apartment and explains that he doesn't want trouble, just wants to find his pregnant girlfriend. One of the men goes to the back to check if the pregnant woman who was there was Julia, and while he waits, Marcos sees some shadows moving behind him. Suddenly, a group of people who had been following him appears, taking advantage of the distraction Marcos caused to invade the market and fight for food. During the conflict between the two groups, Marcos also enters the store and goes looking for Julia, but ends up finding Andrea instead. Andrea tells him that the last time she saw Julia was the day she left for a medical appointment on Via Laietana, and after kicking an attacker who was getting close, takes Marcos to an exit nearby. But the two end up separating when a piece of burning wood falls from above right between them, leaving Andrea trapped between the fire and the exit. She manages to open the doors, and Marcos tells her to run out. But she doesn't have the courage to do it and ends up dying when more pieces of the ceiling fall on top of her. Marcos doesn't waste a second and runs to the opposite side, but is attacked by one of the invaders who was completely out of control. He almost gets stabbed when suddenly Enrique appears and throws the guy away, then helps Marcos stand up, saying he already knew he would still need his help. The attacker hadn't left and quickly returns to try to stab Enrique in the stomach. Enrique manages to push the guy away, but when he's about to pierce him with his spear, he sees that it's just a scared boy, so he decides not to hurt him. Pretending that his wound wasn't anything serious and that everything was fine, Enrique tells Marcos that they need to get out of the mall quickly before the entire building falls. They go through the sewers again until they find a hole in the ceiling that someone had made, and when they climb through it, they arrive inside a movie theater. There was no one in the place, so Marcos goes to the glass door and observes that the medical office is across the street on Via Laietana. It's impossible for him to get there that way because the passage is closed. Getting increasingly desperate, he climbs the steps and looks through the window, trying to see if he can locate Julia in the other building. It takes a while, but he finally finds her, and when this happens, he starts screaming her name and hitting the window glass, hoping she'll see him too. At first, it seems like she'll never look back, but Marcos's strategy seems to work because Julia suddenly turns around and the couple finally meets again and cries with joy. Marcos runs down the stairs to tell Enrique about Julia, but finds him sitting in the theater losing blood. He wants to look for something to make a bandage for the wound, but Enrique doesn't allow it, saying his time had come. His last words are a request for Marcos to stop crying and cross the street to be with his family once and for all. Enrique dies at that moment, and Marcos pauses to cry for him before doing what he asked. Both he and Julia reach their doors, and after thinking a bit, Marcos finally puts his foot on the street. He soon begins to feel nauseous and dizzy, his ears start bleeding, and he has difficulty walking. But looking straight at Julia, he manages to keep going even after falling to the ground, dragging himself the rest of the way while a very bright white light becomes the only thing he can see around him. Suddenly, Julia's face appears above him, and when the light goes away, Marcos understands that he managed to cross the street and reach the building, finally finding his beloved. The couple stays in that place and starts a new life there, collecting rainwater and planting the seeds Enrique had given them. Their baby is born strong and healthy, and when he learns to walk, he goes out alone, showing that children are not affected by the panic. Many years pass, a group of young people who walk around appears at their door, so Marcos and Julia decide to let the boy go with them so he can have the opportunity to know what the world outside is like and maybe have the chance to rebuild society from the beginning. And so the film comes to an end. What score would you give this film? Now, do you understand why I said it's one of the most distressing stories about survival? Don't forget to activate the bell to be notified of new summaries. So until the next recap,